despite the fact that your organization needs women, when you bring women in laterally, if you do not overinvest in their success, they will not be as successful as they can be. They will never reach their potential. And as I said, a narrative is created when people leave. And most companies will make you interview 15 to 18 different times before they give you the offer. And so how can you tell me when that person leaves that you made a recruiting mistake? Really? 15, 18 interviews? You made a mistake? I would submit to you the problem is not the candidate, it's the house. So you have to have a level of accountability. And the last thing, as I said, is the consistency. You must have the intensity through bull and bear market environments if you want to build a team of great women and great men in your organization. And again, it is imperative that you do it, or you will not be the employer of choice. You will not have the best minds. You will not be able to innovate. And if you cannot innovate in this environment, you cannot compete at the end of the day. And as I close, as we go to this conversation, let me give you one last thought. If you are sitting in the leadership seat, ladies and gentlemen, you have to be intentional. You have chosen a profession called the financial services profession that has really been a producer culture for a long time. If you brought in revenues, you were rewarded, you were compensated. If you brought in revenues and new clients, you were promoted. If you brought in lots of revenues and lots of new clients, you were given a leadership seat. And it mattered not really whether or not you could lead or you could manage. You were just a great producer, and that's how you were rewarded. The problem is now we're living in an environment where people want to be led, they want to be inspired, they want to be motivated, and frankly, they want to be managed. So if you have chosen to take on the leadership seat, you have to be intentional. Being a leader is contact sports. You have to be intentional, and you must be intentional around 8 things. You must be intentional around your authenticity. If you do not bring your authentic self to the table, then you will not inspire and motivate those who are working with you to bring their authentic selves to the table. And when any of us is in an environment where we can be who we really are, we always outperform, and that will accrue to your status in the leadership seat. You must also be intentional about building trust. If people trust you, they will go the extra mile for you. And you want those who are working with you to give you the extra. You never want the job description. You always want the extra. That will also accrue to your status in that leadership seat. You must be intentional about creating other leaders. Those of you, and I'm really talking to my sisters here in the audience because we have a real problem with this. I don't often give gender-specific advice, but here's where I'll do it. We tend to hold on to all the things that we've been doing from the time we came into an organization to 10 years later. If you are getting overwhelmed, you have too much on your plate. If you are in the leadership seat, you should let go a substantial amount of the things that you have been doing and give them to someone else so that you can develop them into being a leader. Leadership, and I say this to the gentlemen and the ladies in the room, leadership is a journey from execution to empowerment. From execution to empowerment. When you're trying to get to the leadership seat, oh yes, you better execute. But when you get to the leadership seat, it's all about empowering and creating other leaders at the end of the day. And if you're having a hard time letting go of things, here is some imagery that I'll give to you. We just finished baseball season in the United States. And I will tell you, I am reminded when I don't want to let go of something that I cannot get to second base with my foot still on first. I have to be willing to let it go if I want to really soar and be the kind of leader that I can be. You must be intentional about creating clarity. You must be intentional about diversity, which I just talked about. You must be intentional around inclusivity, which means soliciting other people's voices. If you are a man in the room and you have a diverse team and you want to make sure that they feel comfortable giving you their best ideas, you need to solicit their voices. IB, how you thinking about that? Faye, I'd like you to push back on her idea. We want to figure out where the gaps are in our argument. Thomas, I want you to think about how would you push back on Faye's idea. We want to make sure we've covered all the gaps before we take this product to market. You do that 4 times as a leader with your group, you won't have to solicit anybody's voice a 5th time. They will know you now value their contributions, that you see them, you value them. You must also be very intentional about making sure you teach your team how to fail, which means you must be intentional around innovation. Women in particular, we don't like to fail. But if you don't like to fail, that means you are not taking as many risks as you should be taking. So you need to empower your team so that they understand that failure is a necessary part of innovating, that there'll be no retribution for making a mistake. And then lastly, you have to be intentional about your voice. If you're going to be an intentional leader, you have to have the courage to call a thing a thing. And if it's a thing, you got to call it as a thing. And most often, especially when there are inequities in the environment, we are afraid to speak. And we are afraid of what people may say about us speaking. We are afraid that we won't be invited to the meeting anymore. We are afraid that they'll take away the power. Well, newsflash, if you have been invited into the room, you have a place at the table. And if you have a place at the table, you have a responsibility to speak. Nobody's going to take away the power. You have earned the right to be in the room and earned the right to be at the table. It is a figment of your imagination. So do not create the narrative between your left ear and your right ear that you're all of a sudden going to lose this power. You have painstakingly earned it. So understand the power that you have in your hand and use it. Your voice is at the heart of your power. When you submerge your voice, you become irrelevant. And when you become irrelevant, you put a target on the front and a target on the back. It's important that if you are choosing the leadership seat, that you exercise your voice. And ladies and gentlemen, as I close and go to this exciting conversation, I tell you that if you want to maximize your success, you must both expect and strategize to win.
I think it's important that they understand that if they have gotten into a room or they have received a certain opportunity, that they've received that opportunity because they're really good and they have a responsibility to speak. As I like to say, if you've been invited into the room, then you have a seat at the table. If you have a seat at the table, you have the responsibility to speak. And so often I think that younger women in the profession don't realize the power that they have, that just by the virtue of the fact that they have been invited into that organization by getting an offer and being hired, and that exercising their voice is a part of the success equation. It's not enough to just put your head down, work, and deliver the work. You're the one who has to create the narrative around the work that you have delivered. You're the one that has to ask the second order, third order derivative question around why something needs to be done. You're the one that has a great idea that if you don't articulate it, the organization will never pursue it. So I think it's important that young women professionals realize that they have a voice and that people are expecting their voice as a part of their overall contribution. And in order for them to maximize their success, they have to exercise the voice. And if you're uncomfortable with that, if you think that you're an introvert, then practice. You can practice at home, you can practice with friends, but as the old saying goes, practice makes perfect. And the more you practice putting your voice out there, the more comfortable you will feel and the more impactful you will be every time you do it. You know, we're living in a world now where innovation is the dominant competitive parameter, and innovation is fueled by ideas. And if you don't avail yourself of all of the intellect, all of the experience, all of the ideas that are out there, then you're likely to miss something when you're trying to bring a product or a process to market. And we're living in a world now where there are really 4 constituencies that any company must be accountable to. It used to be 3, I might argue. And in my argument, it was certainly the shareholders, it was certainly the customers, it was certainly the employees, but now there's a fourth called community, and that community is powered by social media. So if you make a misstep there, it is amplified in a very short period of time. That could actually hurt your brand and hurt your ability to compete. So I think that in order to actually guard against that, you need to make sure you have a lot of different voices around the table when a decision is being made, especially when you're taking a decision to market in any way. And if you are in an industry where your dominant assets go up and down on the elevator every day, then that means you have an aspiration to be an employer of choice. And if you're going to be an employer of choice, I think you have to have an environment where people realize that everybody is included. And certainly the millennial generation values that, and they look at that in a way that I would argue we as boomers didn't. Don't be distracted by the fact that you're the only person in the room. And when I say distracted by the negative thoughts, like, oh, I'm the only one in the room, I have to be much better. These guys, what am I gonna do to get them to pay attention to me? The fact that you've already gotten in the room, that is your evidence that you are qualified to be in that room. Nobody's gonna put you in that room if they don't think that you can hold your own. So you need to own that. And if you don't own it and trust it in your own mind, trust the folks that put you there, right? Because they made that decision. And if you couldn't compete, they wouldn't have put you in the room. So I don't think you have to overexert. Now, what I do think you might want to do is be strategic about those folks in the room. There's going to be somebody in that room that you can build a quick relationship with, or that you can talk to, or that you can at least try to, make some connections with before you actually put your point out there in front of the larger group. But you want to be thoughtful about that, but don't be deterred, and whatever you do, don't let fear grow while you're waiting to actually present yourself or present your ideas, right? And if you're talking and people are talking over you, then assert yourself and say, hey, wait a minute, I was respectful enough to listen to your point. Can't you give a girl a shot, right? And then make your point. But again, don't be so consumed by fear that you don't ask for the proper respect. And you don't have to do that in a way that you're pounding the table. You can do that in a way that everybody will hear you, right? But own it. I keep pointing to don't be consumed with fear, because I do think it's fear that actually stands as an impediment for us being all that we can be in any kind of environment. Afraid of what people are going to think, afraid that we might fail, afraid that we might speak. Fear has no place in your success equation.